Hey there, guys. Just a little bit of a supplement here to what we're seeing for Chapter 7. What we have been doing to date is really just using HTML and CSS and publishing everything in what is known as normal flow. So normal flow, like we talked about in class, essentially goes from top to bottom, from left to right. So every time we have a new tag of some sort, a paragraph, an H1, etc. Those come with their own rules for what it is we do with the tag that follows it. So a paragraph, for instance, and a heading tag, an H1 and H2, etc. All of those have a rule that's associated with them, and that rule says whatever the next tag is going to start on the next line down. So if you look at the Path of Light Yoga Studios, if you look at the the Pacific Trails Resort, anything that we've been doing, essentially what we get is an image that can float to the left or to the right. We have a little bit of text, which is just simply going to be taking up whatever space it has, and we have really not a ton of content on top of a potentially a different colored background, or etc. From here on out, with Chapter 7 on out, what we are going to do is really refine how that goes. Normal flow is the browser, it is the HTML, it is CSS telling you how to behave. And what we are going to do is use user-created IDs and classes. A class and an ID are simply a container. It is a container of your specification. So if you like a container that is 100 pixels tall by 100 pixels wide, that's great. If you like a container that is 200 pixels tall by 200 pixels wide, that is great. And as a matter of fact, that's what we're doing here. So hopefully you can see what's going on here. I'm actually prevented from making this any larger. And what we have is just a simple HTML page. You can follow along with this example. Just go ahead and click on the link that was immediately on top of this podcast here, and you can follow along with the example. Or you can do it right here in the replit that you can see on page, so that you can type and listen in, hopefully, at the same time. So all this is a very simple little HTML page with a couple of small changes here. Right here on line number 3, you can see that I have broken my own rules and included an embedded style sheet. That is not because that is a good or normal function. It is simply because it's easiest to see if everything is all here on one page. So what we're seeing here with that embedded style, again, that is not what we would like to see as normal behavior, but in the ease of simplicity, that's what I did. Next, what we can see here is I've created for you 3 container classes. Now, a quick word on the difference between a class and an ID. Both of them function almost entirely in exactly the same way. Here on line number 4, I have a class called box. Now, we can tell it's a class because it is shown with a dot notation, so dot box 1. That means I can use this box as many times as I would like on a page without having to create another new version of it. An ID is actually signified with a hashtag in front of it. So just like you see right there, so it's hashtag box 1. That's an ID. That means that this particular container can only be used one time on a page. Now, there's all manner of discussion and preference in the community as to the difference between why would you use a class and an ID if they function entirely the same. But the only real difference is one can be used multiple times. That's the class. That's what we see right here. And an ID can only be used once. It really just matters the level of control you want to have. Things like wrapper, for example. You're not going to use more than one time on a page because you want it to house the entire content. So by making that an ID, You are forcing the page, you are forcing actually the next developer who comes in after you to change your code. You are forcing them to behave the way you want them to behave. And that certainly has some benefits to it. For something this simple, and actually, I argue it's repeatable. We are going to use box 1, box 2, and box 3 like we see here on lines 4, 14, and 24. We're actually going to use them each twice on this page. So that means by necessity, it has to be a class instead of an ID. If you come right up here and hit run, what we're going to see is an actual inline live preview one of these days of what is going to happen with our page here. Maybe. Let's run that again. There we go. So this is the normal flow of a web page. As you can see, I just have here on lines 38, 39, and 40. All I have is the declarations for those classes. Box 1, box 2, box 3. So here we see that the red box is box number 1. There we go. This one is number 1. This one is number 2. The green box is number 3. Over here from lines 24 through, I don't know, about 31, you can see how I did that. I simply declare a class ID. So I call that class box 3, so dot box 3. Inside of the curly brackets, that's where I start defining what my class is going to do. So I have given it a height and a width. So a width of 300 pixels and a height of 300 pixels. So I get a big green box. So there's my background color, dark green. Padding 15 pixels and margin 15 pixels. What you'll notice is that creates that little bit of space over here on the far left-hand side of the page. And it helps also create the little bit of space here we can see in between our two boxes. So that is normal flow. We would see the first element, and that's on line number 38. That's box 1. It forces box 2 to be displayed underneath it. Box 2 forces box 3 to be displayed underneath it, and away we go. Now, the only difference we're going to do here is we want to change the way that these container classes display. The thing we want to do is add this, display inline block. What that is going to do, so I'm going to add it here to box 2. I'm going to add it here to box 3. What that is going to do is it's going to supersede the rules of normal flow. It is going to force those boxes, rather than go on new lines, they're going to display where they are, and then it's going to allow the next element to display where it is. So down here between lines, I don't know, about 49 and 41, I have a block of commented code. If you highlight everything between 41 and 49 and hit Control and then / what Replit is going to do, in the same way that Brackets or Atom or Notepad++ or whichever environment it is that you chose, it's going to uncomment that code for you. So now you can see I have div class 3, div class box 3, because that's my biggest one. Nested inside of that, you'll notice I do not have my closing div on line 45. On line 46, I declare div class 2. On line 47, I go ahead and call, I call div class 1. And then here on line 48, I'm closing those divs. So what that's going to do is say, okay, look, I'm done stacking these containers on top of one another. I don't want you to display that way. One little word here on why that yellow brick is happening where it is. It's actually because we have inline block, and when we put inline block there, The yellow brick says, hey, wait a second, I actually fit on this line with the red brick. So rather than forcing normal flow to push me into the line immediately after it, because we are using Inline-Block, what we're actually able to do here is pull the yellow box number 2 here onto the same line immediately following what's happening in box number 1. And if we scroll down just a little bit, what we'll actually see is where all the neat stuff is happening. What happens here is because we have nested the elements. So over here between lines 41 and 49, I have my big box, the medium box, and the little box. All of them called one after another. They're actually going to do this. They're going to nest together, and they're going to take up the same amount of space. So if we use this in thinking about sites like The Verge, where we have an image in the background, an opacity overlaid, and a black container box with white text over it, that's exactly how they're doing this. It's the inclusion of this one little bitty property right here. It is display : Inline-Block. Now, actually, display has a couple of different properties to it that we're going to get to. Not all of them are necessarily going to provide you with the same amount of flexibility. The one we're going to use for the time being is Inline-Block, and later on we're going to get even more granular with this and go to what is known as a flex box. But for the time being, when you are looking at nesting elements inside of one another, when you are looking at not using normal flow but telling normal flow what to do, this is absolutely the way you want to go about that, using display Inline-Block, using user-created content classes and IDs, and really telling the browser how to display rather than the browser telling your content how to display.